Begin with some discussion of the development of the theme, the research theme, a little bit of an overview of what we did last year, and we'll quickly review some of the projects that we did last year. I imagine many of you were able to come to the showcase in July, and we've got the book here, which has a little more detail on the projects. The videos of the projects, websites of the projects is all online, so I'm not going to go into as much detail on them as I did a few days ago. I'm here in Russia doing a kind of evangelical tour on behalf of the program. We were in Amsterdam and Berlin last week, and then went to Yekaterinburg and Novosibirsk. Nikolai was in Copenhagen, Helsinki, St. Petersburg. Yeah, so we have a little bit of it all covered. So, but again, most of you have seen this. Some of the projects here as well. The theme, the new normal, from last year, we're extending this over the course of a 3-year cycle, which was kind of the original plan. The idea was that with the same group of faculty and a similar group of students, we can build up a longer-term research project and can test and develop some methodologies that would be impossible to do in one cycle. And so the year that you'll be coming in for the second year is ideal, and that we've run through this once. We know how it works with the moving parts, and we're ready to sort of take this to the next, to take it to the next level. And so let me go through this a bit. So again, the original idea was this 3-year cycle where we would have an accumulation of research sort of focusing on the development of a new kind of urban design research methodology, research and speculative design projects and practices. One way to think about the types of work that we'll do within this is in relationship to the ways that design deals with models. We have descriptive models that are models that describe the world as it is, and that the validity of these models is whether or not they're true or not, whether or not they have a correspondence to the world in which we have out there. There's predictive models that are attempting to understand what is most likely to happen. And there's projective models, which is where design really has its most specific expertise, which is in producing a prototype of what might be or what should be. And so one way to think about the kinds of things that we'll do within the program is moving between these 3 kinds of models. The predictive model, the value is also in whether it's true. The projective model is less in whether it's true and in how it changes the terms of what we're working with. So another way that we could differentiate this program from some other urban design programs is not only its interdisciplinarity, which is true and we've spoken to, but also its relationship to a genre of design which is coming to be called speculative design, which is and I don't mean to promote this as somehow as opposed to other kinds of design, but in addition to it, what it's interested in is less in terms of solving already understood problems, optimizing already understood problems to make them slightly better, but rather in reframing what the problems are in the first place, such that the possibility of solutions to those reframed understanding of the problems becomes possible. So let me speak quickly to the urban design themes. I'm going to try to run through the talk relatively quickly so that we can get to the most important part, which would be the discussion about what we would actually do together. So if it seems like I'm zooming through it, I apologize. So some of the themes that we're looking at that we think are sort of macro trends that will define the future of urban systems more generally. Automation. We say of the coming generation, that the automation of infrastructural systems, small-scale systems, object-scale systems will continue apace. The impact of this at urban scale will be significant. Arguably that the way in which not just Moscow, but any industrial city was organized in the segmentation of a zone. This is a residential area, this is an industrial area, this is a transportation area, this is a commercial area, was organized around the needs of a particular kind of economy of production, around factories or around post-industrial office areas. Automation as automation disrupts the foundation of these of those economic processes, the way in which we need to organize the built environment at urban scale will change along with it. This is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's one of the fundamental driving forces that will be a push and pull force as the kinds of decisions we have to make about the organization of the cities in which we live. We're interested in what we call cloud geographies. In the book, The Stack, which came out a couple of years ago, which I wrote about how increasingly global cloud platforms have taken on many of the effective functions that were traditionally assigned to the modern nation state. Identity, cartography, currency. It's not as though a law was passed and somehow this happened. It just became a kind of functional process. And in doing so, a different kind of geography becomes at work. That Google or Facebook, there isn't a part of the map that you can point to and say that's where Google is and that's where Alibaba is necessarily. They interweave with one another. There's another geographic process at work. And a lot of to the extent to which a lot of foundational urban programs throughout the 20th century were developed by state entities or commercial entities, one way or another, that have a kind of fixed footprint and fixed location. The role that cloud platforms more broadly have in organizing fundamental urban systems, mobility, housing, cartography, micro exchanges, and so forth, is just beginning. And the examples that we're familiar with of the Google and Airbnb and Uber and things like this, we should see as sort of the seedlings of a more fundamental transformation in how it is that swarms of people might organize themselves at urban scale. More generally, we are thinking these through what we call stack systems, which are modular infrastructural systems in which different layers of the stack take on a different specific function, and that each of these layers can be displaced or replaced. And the book, The Stack, in which I wrote, sort of lays out a very long explication of this concept more generally. A lot of the projects we were interested in logistics, more broadly conceived. Now, by logistics, what we mean is systems for the organized movement of objects. People too, but almost primarily objects. The globalization that has taken place since really the late 60s, in the 73 in the oil crisis. Yes, it's been a globalization of demographic shifts of people. Yes, it's been a cultural globalization. It's been an information globalization, but it's also been a globalization of material culture, of objects that are produced in one part of the world, distributed in another part, designed in another part, consumed in another part. And the organization of this material flow is not something that's happening sort of on top of the important economic processes or cultural processes. It is one of the important cultural and economic processes. And so understanding the logistical imaginary is something that is at the basis of how we may think about urban networks and urban systems, particularly in relationship to the precarity of our ecological situation, is one that we take a great deal of interest in. We're interested not just, though, in these sort of big infrastructural apparatuses, but also in the experiences through which people connect to them and people make use of them. The city as an experience. And increasingly, with these glowing glass slab rectangles that we carry around with us, the interfaces with which we interact with the city are ones that are designable, programmable, and as we shift towards more immersive forms of urban interfaciality, augmented reality in particular is of real interest to us. How we narrativize the relationship to infrastructure and to one another and to the city becomes an essential kind of design problem. That said, we're interested not just in these, in sort of big, perfect systems in which all place for everything and all things in their place. We're interested in messy systems. We're interested in systems that are able to adapt to noise, that get better the noisier that they get, or can adapt to them in this way. They're not fragile systems in one way or another. We're not trying to produce perfect solutions. We're trying to produce interventions that once they're put out in the world responds to them, and the value is in that response as much as anything else. Instead of globalization in the traditional sense, as a kind of federation of countries, we're interested in the more fundamental notion of planetarity, that the common predicament that we face is an astronomic scale. And that the challenges of the Anthropocene, the challenges of the ecological precarity in which we find ourselves, are ones that are operating at a planetary scale. And so we take this as essentially the ground figure on which the ground plane on which the figure of the projects would take place. As you'll see in some of the projects, this meant a lot of interest in space, in the history of space as a design imaginary, particularly in Russia. So I should say then, though, despite I think there's a strong emphasis on speculation, on the imagination and creativity of unexpected, non-commonsensical, seeming sometimes uncanny, seemingly ludicrous types of projects, at least as a method to get going. We're really a kind of, I think a lot of projects are really, at the end of the day, realist. The idea is not that the world is sort of stable and therefore we're going to be the artists who have a kind of imagination to move out of this stable form. The idea is more that the world has shifted rather fundamentally, and to see it as it is, quite directly, means that the concepts that we need are ones that are quite different than the common sense that we may have helped in years past. And so what may seem strange is in fact quite realist. Or to put it differently, as Trump said, the whole age of the computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. So that's kind of our starting point. The essay that you have here tries to develop some of our thinking around the curriculum design in relation to these themes in a bit more detail. So let me quickly go through the program as we went last year. As Olga mentioned, we begin in February. I don't have to tell you that February in Moscow is quite balmy, sunny. We usually start with a volleyball tournament just to sort of break the ice, literally. So what we have 30 people. So last year, half architects and urbanists, half non-architects and urbanists, half international, half Russian, half men, half women. All 30 strangers, don't know each other. Lock them in a room in Moscow, just like, Big Brother or something, but without the cameras. But everything worked out pretty well. So the process begins with the theoretical and historical seminars. At the beginning, we kind of set the stage of what really are the fundamental concepts that we want to work through, the histories that we want to draw upon, the theoretical languages and apparatuses that we'll make use of. And so I began with a seminar based around the stack. We had a number of other, which is this model here, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on as well, but it's a kind of model for how it is we can understand the political geography of planetary scale computation. An earth layer, a cloud layer, city layer, address layer, interface, address and user. There's a lot of talks online where I go into much more detail about this as well. And this is not what I wanted to really talk to you about today, but that's kind of what we start with. Okay, and then we have, and then in this sequence we also had a number of other people were brought in from different. Julieta Aranda, the Mexican-German artist, does a workshop with us on space. It was based around the strike, an astronaut strike from 1974 on the Skylab. The astronauts went on strike, demanding more time to look out the window and contemplate being in space instead of doing their homework. And this was sort of like, what would the Skylab strike of today be like? Stephanie Sherman and Sasha Poflep from UCSD did workshops around speculative design methodologies. Marta Fiera de Sa and Benedict Singleton from the London-based boutique strategy firm Rival did a workshop on strategy, on strategy design. Etienne Turpin, architectural theorist, known for his books on architecture in the Anthropocene. Ben Cervini, a serial entrepreneur and designer and founder of many good companies, also will come in during this period as well. So this is there's a number of other people we're speaking to who will be part of this initial part. This is more of the deep theoretical and historical process. We then shift to technical workshops. And the way in which we do the technical workshops, that they're not meant to provide a kind of super deep mastery of some sort of skill, but rather because some of the people who come in, they already know this, other people don't know anything about that tool. Next week, it's inverse. The second people know the tool, the first person don't. The idea really is to provide a kind of Swiss Army knife capacity in a lot of important emerging technologies so that everyone can collaborate, so that everyone knows these things well enough that the projects can collaborate based around them as well. So some of these have to do with programming-based technology, some of them are cinematic-based technology, some of them are AR, VR, and the rest of this. So last year and this year, we'll also, Gene Kogan does a workshop with us on machine vision. Sugwen Chung does these drawing robots. Casey Rios, you may know, is one of the founders of the processing project, processing software with Ben Fry. Casey comes and does a workshop around processing. There'll be several others that we're currently booking as well. One of the ones we had last year, and we're finalizing dates with him again this year, hopefully, is Keiichi Matsuda. Keiichi is one of the most interesting designers and filmmakers around augmented reality, which is an urban technology that we're extremely interested in developing for. He's based in London, and he does these sort of film-based workshops with us around designing for AR. Last year, we were working with this primarily in cinematic tools, After Effects, where you can composite these as well, though since then, there's a number of simple AR kit for iOS and some of Android's tools as well, that it's a little bit easier to actually develop some of these things for real. This is something that's important to us. We also then, in addition to locking you in the room, we also sometimes let you out and go on trips yonder far. Star City, again, this issue of planetarity and space and thinking about what the logic of design in space does for thinking about total systems and what it means to design whole systems is of interest to us. And so to Star City, we're looking at other places next year. We also then went up to Murmansk, which is, I know, everyone's dream to go to the Arctic coast of Murmansk. But what we're interested in with this was around automation. In particular, the scenario that sort of drove this was how, with the anticipation of the melting of the polar ice cap, Russia, Norway, Iceland, Canada, China to some extent, are racing to build these automated shipping ports along cities along the Arctic coast. And so this prospect of Hyperborean robot cities at the top of the planet sending shipping containers back and forth to themselves seemed like about the most new normal thing we could think of, and so wanted to go investigate this. We brought the LiDAR system up with this. LiDAR, if you don't know, is sort of like a portmanteau of laser radar. It sends out an infrared beam that creates a point cloud of the space that it develops, and produces some really beautiful footage. And the landscape, the sort of inhuman scale of this, indifferent scale of this landscape was really striking, as you'll tell. And in a couple of the projects, it shows up quite directly. We then decamped to California. California has a bear and a red star as well. We were based at, that's the flag of California, by the way. So when California secedes, that would be the flag. This is University of California, San Diego in La Jolla, which is where I'm a professor of speculative design and visual arts, where the Salk Institute is, where you may be familiar. And so while we were there, we had the opportunity to visit a lot of labs and to look at some of the preliminary work that we have developed on some of the very large display systems that we did as well. We also got to visit local UFO cults, which is always an important part of any academic field trip. This is the Unarians in El Cajon. You can YouTube, you can Google some of the, you can look up on YouTube some of their quite amazing videos from the 70s. This is also their city of the future after the overlords from the other side of the universe organize us and get us together, which is this sort of, there's Nicola looking a little bit bemused. It's sort of a weird mix of like Buckminster Fuller and Paolo Soleri and Land of the Lost is the way I sort of think about these things as well. They were very nice. They were really wonderful people. So anyway, we tried to do that. We also then, Jeff Mena, who you may know from Building Blog and a number of other excellent books, when we went to Los Angeles where we were hosted at SciArc, he, among other things that we did there, he took us on this sort of legal tour of the abandoned subway tunnels underneath downtown Los Angeles. I was born in Los Angeles and didn't even know these things were there. So all the way down in this pitch black structure of this as well. All good times. Then back to sunny Moscow for surfing and whatnot. And to sort of dive back into and to get into the real sort of meat of the core of the design studios. So last year and this year, one of the things we missed Lev last year because there was a sort of an unfortunate crisis he had to attend to. But one of the things we're being is the first of the studio modules is called pattern recognition, and it's on big data and quantitative tools for data analysis. And the way in which Lev works with this is which he calls cultural analytics, is really looking around, is looking at patterns. How it is that data can allow us to see patterns that are either too fast or too slow or too complex for us able to see them otherwise. And also how it can help us to not see and not to ignore patterns that we see that actually aren't true. The thing is, as a pattern recognition species, the double-edged sword of this is that we can see patterns that are there and act upon them. The other aspect of this is sometimes we see patterns that are not real. And one of the things that, again, that these tools allow us to essentially differentiate from these from one way or another. And so Lev, who you know is probably, in addition to being an extremely important new media and media historian and theorist, and he'll teach a seminar on sort of the 200-year history of Russian new media to the present. Also a technical workshop on some of these cultural analytic data tools. The figure of the megastructure, and particularly the speculative megastructure, the ones that aren't, this is, of course, Super Studio's continuous monument from 1968, a building that was proposed to go around the entire Earth, unbuilt, as it was, just saying. Speculative megastructures have been a way in which architecture has, another way in which architecture has tried to think total systems, to try to understand how it is that we could imagine the entire interrelationship of systems at multiple different scales, and to design and to design them at once. However, part of the stack thesis is that the megastructures in which we operate now are not inside a building envelope. They're discontiguous. They're broken apart and scattered. They're discontiguous megastructures in which we operate. and how it is that these, and how it, and does this change and make more difficult the way in which we might use them to think about totalities, political totalities, cultural totalities, ecological totalities. This is the trade of the Australian architect Liam Young, who taught at the AA in London for many years and is now based at SciArc in Los Angeles. Liam is sort of famous for these wonderful speculative architecture films that he develops and projects around this as well. Liam is also the one who led the sojourn up to Murmansk and then came back for the design studio, so he's here twice, so he gets 2 pictures. But that said, the megastructures, both speculative and built, in the guise of charter cities and new smart cities, are not only about sort of trying to account for the messiness of total systems. They also are a medium of political control, and the political control itself is sometimes a medium of a kind of gamesmanship, in which things that seem to be about control are actually about slippage, things that seem to be about slippage are actually about control, things that seem to be exceptional are actually normal, things to be normal are actually exceptional, special economic zones becoming a norm. Keller Easterling, the author from Yale School of Architecture and the author of Extra Statecraft, among other things, is sort of the exemplary theorist of precisely this phenomenon, and so she teaches this module with us as well. Lastly, in terms of the kinds of, I think if you asked a lot of the students last year, what was the form of the urban design proposal that they were making, whether it's a building, was it a plan, many of them would have said it's a platform. And one of the things that we sort of spent a lot of time unpacking really what a platform means, but one of the things that became very clear was that in addition to platforms being a kind of technological apparatus and also a kind of institutional apparatus, they work because they have a particular aesthetics. That the aesthetics of platforms, that the narrative of the platform is indistinguishable from its efficacy. Metahaven, the Amsterdam-based design and cinema studio, increasingly they do a lot more documentary films, develops this as well, and you see their hand a lot around a lot of these as well. And so, and additionally, we try to schedule it to where the fact that here's Keller and Daniel from Metahaven and Masha. We try to schedule this so that the fact that there's an overlap between the modules, and so that there's a conversation between the faculties that develops together, and this handoff becomes important. Now, just to be clear, because sometimes sometimes it should go without saying, but sometimes it's not clear. These studios that I'm talking about, it's not of the 30 people that 5 of them are going to be in one, and 5 of them are going to be in the other, and 5 of them are going to be in the other. So they're like, you're going to get one of these 5. You get all of these. They all happen in sequence. So all 30 students are going to be in this as well, just so that's clear. Okay. So that's a sort of quick overview of who we had moving next year. Actually, to be fair, we actually had over 40 people, whether guest lecturers or studio faculty or this as well, people that we visited from last year, and I think by next year it'll probably, it'll be at least this big, if not more, already. So a couple of the few people, there's new people we're adding to the mix for next year. A few that we can mention is already Dunn and Raby, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby, who ran the famous Design Interactions program at Royal College of Art in London for many years. We just published the Russian translation of their book, Speculative Everything. They're now at Parsons in New York. Will be coming and doing a workshop with us. Armin Avanesian, the German, Austrian actually, political philosopher based in London, editor and curator of several important works, will be doing work this. I also was very interested in doing something around interiors, about interiority, and also around landscape scale design. And Petra Blaise, an Amsterdam-based designer, Inside Outside is her studio, happens to be, I think, quite the best at both of these. She does a lot of projects with OMA, as you know. And for me, a lot of the things about the OMA projects, the OMA projects that I like the most, the things about those projects that I like the most are in many cases more Petra's work than OMA's. We're also going to be collaborating with a group from Google Research called Artist and Machine Intelligence. You're probably these deep dream images are some of the work from the AMI group that you're probably most familiar with. Have you seen these before? Do you know how these work? Oh, you were at the talk in Berlin. Oh, last year. Oh, last year. Okay, yeah, they're still there. It's still creepy dogs. Basically, the idea, just to sort of demystify this a little bit, is what happens is that you've got an object recognition software that's tasked to try to find something in the image, right? And so it finds faces of your friend, on your Facebook or whatever. There's ones that are trained that are using an image set that happens to be called image set, and what image set is full of is gazillions of pictures of dogs. And you use it to try to train the AI to find the dog in the picture. And the reason this is useful is because unlike, say, a banana, which more or less all look alike, dogs look very different. Little dogs, big dogs, curly-haired dogs, long-haired dogs, whatever. To pick out what's a dog as opposed to a couch or a horse is sort of hard. And so training to find dogs is a key thing. So what they basically did was take the pictures, say, okay, try to find the dog in the picture that there is no dog. In the part of the picture where it seems like that there are quasi-dog-like features, run a kind of find edges function on that section in order to make those features a little bit stronger. Now repeat that process. Try to find the dog in the picture. And they basically, put its tail in its mouth and ran it around several thousands of times, and what you get is AI psychedelic hallucination of dog faces. So, accomplishments. Okay, so next year, a few of the things that will be... So also then I'll just sort of quickly go through, I think maybe some of you were there in July. We then ended with our time together with this big extravaganza on July 3rd and 4th. 2,000 people and plus on the first day, where we Rem came back for a nice discussion on his countryside project. We were all very happy and relieved. So the day was divided into two sections where we had the faculty and the student projects presenting one after the other. And I'll quickly go through some of those. What you'll see is what's in many ways emerging as the kind of form and format of the design research we're developing on strategy, cinema, and software in basic combinations. Again, you want to see more detail around each of these projects, you can just go to the URL. So I'm going to very, very quickly run through these because I'd really rather get to talk a little bit about what we're going to do next year, and because a lot of this is online. So Shift, which was a project that Lisa was CEO of, because they were going forward, yes, is an project about automation. But not and particularly automation of transportation, but not automation of transportation in like driverless car sense, but rather a much more deeper infrastructural level of transportation, that is trucks. The trucks that move the stuff all around Russia. It started with an understanding that the trucking industry in Russia, for a country in which many infrastructural systems are so centralized, in fact, you correct me in the exact statistics, but it's something like 80% of the trucking companies, 80% of the trucks on the road are owned by companies that own 4 or fewer trucks. Which means essentially it's an owner-operated infrastructure. It's an infrastructure that has in computer science we might we call stateful edges. So what they're interested in is how could you automate, how could you protect this owner-operated mechanism, this system, and working with the OCR Truckers Union by introducing driverless automation, where you could have whatever the safety increases, all the other kinds of things that automated transportation would bring, but at the edges. And so they developed this system where an app that would link the trucks together, that would allow individual trucks to be outfitted with sensors and automation technologies, such that each of the trucks, as it moves through the countryside, is gathering more data about its routes, and as it gathers more data about its routes, it becomes smarter on how to drive those routes, and that this data commons that now the union has access to becomes a barrier to entry for any of the other large platform players, as they would begin in it as well. So it's this is all taking place in the future, by the way. These trucks don't exist yet, just so you know. So sever, which is Russian for north, as far as I'm told, and in English for like to cut away, is about a northern secession of sorts. This would be the network of the Arctic Sea. These are the cities that are along the Arctic coast that are there. And so looking at this, Sever is the name of this network of those seas. There's Murmansk, but also Reykjavik and Anchorage and some of the Norwegian cities of this as well. Sever is the name of this network. What it also is here's some of the footage that was shot up there with the Phantom 4 drone. It's also the name of an Ethereum-based token that gets more valuable the closer to magnetic north you go. And so it would incentivize the development of the economic networks along along the rim of the Arctic coast, as a reserve currency and as a trade currency, as this works together. So again, there's a lot more information. I'm showing you stills from the film. The film is really quite amazingly gorgeous, and you can see this online. All of this was shot by our students. I'm going to skip over the film for today. Patternist. Patternist is an AR-based urban game. It's now in its third. Now, since July, it's now in its third iteration. Was part of a Rhizome in New York grant, and it works a little bit like some of the urban AR games maybe you're familiar with, Ingress, Pokemon Go, where you look through your phone and you have an interfacial overlay looking for things that you need to collect and then gather together. The backstory of Patternist is that there's a planet far away that has a particular geology and geography, and there's a particular table of elements that compose this planet. Those elements exist in a virtual realm here on Earth, and with the interface, you can go around the city and find where those elements are, which you can gather to compose into alloys, which you use to build up the geography of the other planet here on Earth. That makes sense? There's an AR version of the game, which was called. There's also here's some pictures of. You can download this for your phone now if you want. Here's some stills of this. I took it playing this in Amsterdam. There's also a desktop version of this. So unlike Pokemon Go or Ingress, you can also on your desktop you can sort of plan out where you want to go through the city and find things, and then later on with your phone go and grab them and bring them together. So, or you can play the whole thing on the desktop if you're not into the whole going outside thing. So these are the alloys, and these are the parts of the city that you find them in. So each of these elements is, the alloys, the elements where you find them in different parts of the city. They become composited together as you combine them in different ways. And you build up layer by layer the geography of one on top of the other of the cities as you find them. And it works quite well. It's quite fun. So Phi is another blockchain project that we do. We didn't plan on doing blockchain projects, but it was kind of, it's 2017, so that's kind of what people were thinking about. What Phi is looking at was based on a discussion that we had about when you go to a data center and you ask which of the computers in here that are taking the most energy. It's inevitably the Bitcoin mining rigs that are taking up the most energy. And at first glance, this seems like the stupidest thing in the world, that you're wasting all of this energy on the generation of these digital magic tokens. On the other hand, if you think about it, what you have is a kind of currency that, I mean, you're paying for not only the computing power to produce the token, but you're also paying for the electricity necessary to produce the computing power. So what you have is almost a currency that the real referent of the currency, not gold, but energy itself. A currency that from the reference is energy, and that this itself is not necessarily so stupid. So what they're interested in was developing was a token in which the referent is renewable energy kilowatts that you produce on the fee network and the software that you need to management. Now this is a typical energy network load management software interface, which is pretty horrible. So not necessarily where you would look for real design innovation, but that's where this is looking at, and this is what they came up with. So this is what you see here on the right are it's kind of weird, it goes away. It goes, okay. What you see there on the right are the nodes within this renewable energy network, which you're then developing with this journaling interface here on the left. So the whole interface works, like Slack, where you type in different kinds of commands or structures or queries. There's a bot that they wrote and designed that will answer queries, will interact with you. You can do all different kinds of calculations, all within this journaling interface. So the fee is both the network and the name of the bot and the name of the token as it works together. This is also, they're now, this group is now decamped to Berlin. Some of them are in Amsterdam, and they're now sort of developing this further in Berlin, where there's, as you know, a lot of investment and interest in blockchains. So Common Task, which we have one of our representatives of here today. Common Task grew out of a discussion, another one of discussions around the space program, and particularly the Russian history of space and cosmism. Nikolai Fedorov and Russian cosmism, who I assume you're more or less familiar with. But so if not, Fedorov was a librarian who worked over here across the street a long time ago. And one of the key ideas of Fedorov's version of cosmism was that the real common task of humanity was to defeat death, to not make it not only so that we would live forever, but that we could resurrect the people who just died, and then resurrect the people who died before them, and then the people who died before them, and then they would resurrect the people who died before them. Now, the fact that we're all made out of the same atoms, don't worry about that for right now. The idea that you would have this infinite refraction of resurrection, and that therefore, because you have resurrecting all these people, and this was all, as you know, articulated within a kind of Russian Orthodox theological framework. If you've resurrected all these people, you're going to quickly run out of room. And therefore, we need to colonize space in order to have more room for all the resurrected people. And so what this project is about is a kind of neo-cosmist movement that takes place in a near future Russia. And it's also based around some of the other ways in which we try to defeat death, namely things like the quantified self movement. And in this case, the driver is that the capturing and aggregation of the data becomes a kind of ritualized ceremonial process by and in the collective aggregation of this data, we collectively defeat this process. There's a wonderful film that they did, which is I think going around to. There's looking at different festivals for this as well, and I think some of this is online. There's a beautiful website that goes with this as well, and so here's some other stills from the film, and you can talk about it there as well after our presentation. The last two, another one of the projects we did, which was a film-based project. Also, I'm just going to show some stills from it because they're also in the process of submitting to different festivals. Is called AirKiss. What AirKiss is about is an urban scale artificial intelligence, but instead of AI understood as some kind of like disembodied voice in the sky, it's understood as it's looking at computing as a physical process, right? And of course it is. We tend to think of computation as somehow virtual, as in non-physical, but it's not. It may be operating in the in a kind of mineral substrate, the movement of electricity through mineral gateways, but it is a physical process that happens in there. It's highly energy intensive, and it has a geologic process and footprint. What they're interested in is looking at a kind of ubiquitous computation and artificial intelligence as something that occurs deep in the matter of the world around us. And that what the film was about is, what does AI feel like in a sort of tactile sense and an experiential sense when it's built into the habitat in this visceral sense. So these are all stills from this quite gorgeous, maybe too gorgeous film that they did around this particular topic. Again, there's shorter versions of this online if you want to see the trailers and stuff. Lastly is a project called DOMA, which is also a blockchain project. There's several projects from blockchains that are interested in housing and real estate around blockchains. DOMA is among these. What DOMA focuses on is the Eastern European context. And in a sense, what they're looking at is how it is, and have done a lot of analysis on Eastern European cities. What they're looking at is, it's economically difficult to buy property, but relatively easy to rent property. And the end result of this is that people end up with just paying rents for a very long period of time, in which they build up no equity in the system. And the way this works then is essentially a REIT, or a real estate investment trust, that's owner operated, and that it buys up a lot of residential property. You then pay rent, your normal rent fees, into this property, which then uses those the money that comes in as rent to purchase new properties. So the money that you pay as rent is like a mortgage. You're actually getting equity in the property, but you're also getting the percentage of the entire property that you own is increasingly expanding because it's always buying more. So they did the modeling around 3 cities in Kiev, Kazan, and Tbilisi, all the ones that have this particularly skewed mortgage to price to rent ratio, where it's much more expensive to pay mortgage on the same place than it is to pay rent on the same place, which is not the case in a lot of other places. And because it's all based on Ethereum smart contracts, there's a lot of transparency, and it's focused on this notion of equity, both as in financial equity, but also in a kind of an equity in terms of social fairness. And so here's some of the charts where, over a period of time, that the amount of percentage of the ownership that you have in the total network gets more, and the monthly payment that you make gets less. And such that by the end of a period of years, that you're basically just paying for maintenance on the units that you own, though you have this large equity in the larger network as a whole. Yep. So they're now in Kiev and raising funds around that as well. So again, if you want to go more detail around, so this is what we did last year. It's a 5-month program, though to be honest, these were really 2-month projects. Because the first half was about the seminar workshops, the technical workshops, the field trips. But this represents 2.5 months of really, really intensive 25 hours a day work that we saw. And so the hope is next year we do a little better. Very quickly then, a couple things around things we're adding for next year. These issues around AI at urban scale are becoming increasingly important. This is Alpha Soissons from Godard's Alphaville. This is sort of an image of urban AI that's kind of not really what we're talking about. And this is the idea of AI as a kind of personified caricature. AI is some kind of master control mechanism. We're much more interested in AI as sort of at the edges. AI as something more like kind of like the way flowers and insects interact and think, not the way like a kind of, AI in a black box or AI in a petri dish might think. Maybe a little bit more like the ocean of Solaris, or insects and flowers. I'm going to skip through some of this more longer description of this, of AI and the ways in which AI works at a sensory scale. We're still interested in these big infrastructure things, but we're also interested in them and how they operate as part of a computational apparatus. So that's these Turing complete infrastructures. The issues of logistics remains incredibly important, both in terms of its as a geographic operation, but also as an object scale operation. We're we're also interested in how many of the logistical infrastructures are oftentimes, in one way or another, exceptional zones, political exceptional zones, or economic exceptional zones, and what could be used, how could we bend that towards more interesting outcomes. So one of the things that we'll be focusing on, as a starting point at least for some of the research, is what's called the One Belt One Road Initiative, or OBOR, or sometimes it's called the New Silk Road Initiative, which is this massive infrastructural investment project that China is undertaking, that will connect up through various pipelines and railways and shipping ports and freeways. China's production areas, Guangzhou, Beijing, Shenzhen, you see, where this is all the way down to Singapore, through India, Dhaka, all the way to Eastern Africa, through to Rotterdam and Hamburg. There's 2 routes going primarily that are planned to go through Russia. One goes through Mongolia to Irkutsk and then branches off from there. Another one goes through Kazakhstan to Kazan and then around to Moscow. This one here, whether or not how the Kazan one connect with Moscow, or does the Moscow one up connect with Istanbul, we'll figure it out. But this is kind of what we're interested in. We're particularly interested in the areas down here where a lot of this stuff comes from. And so we're going to, our international trip this year is not to California, but to Hong Kong and Shenzhen. For both because this Hong Kong-Shenzhen region, you could think of it as sort of the head of the river from which all of this stuff flows west, but also because of their status as these kind of exceptional cities. Hong Kong being a kind of political exception, Shenzhen beginning as a special economic zone. So you have the special political zone next to a special economic zone that has this very strong border between the two. So what's exactly being included? So for both reasons, as sort of laboratories, this is where we're going to be going, looking at these enclave, exclave territories as part of this whole thing. So sometimes those enclave and exclaves operate by horizontal border walls. Sometimes they operate in a vertical angle, and sometimes they operate in the cloud, where the firewalls are not physical, they're virtual. All of these are of real interest to us. And based on the stack, well, I guess you could say one of the things we're interested in is the development of not just the one stack, but these hemispherical stacks. That there's not just a global, there's now a North Atlantic stack, but arguably a Russian stack and a Chinese stack as well. And so the role of China in these hemispherical rotations will also be sort of important to us. Okay, so that wraps it up. This is again the URL that you need for all of your everything you'll need to go for. As Olga, Nikolai, and mentioned, really the outcome of the program as we see it is not just these projects, but also really as new kinds of urban design practices that are able to enter into urban design problems at multiple different scales and registers. So starting with the software and moving to the planning, starting with the planning, moving to the software. So I'll leave you with 2 quotes then. One depressing, and one a little bit less so, which is sort of where we see that our unshaken belief that the time of cruel wonders is not yet over. So we like to see ourselves as in the cruel wonders business, I suppose. Anyway, let's have some conversation around this well. Thank you for your time.